number 10 of the Subcommittee on International Human Rights of the Standing Committee on Foreign Affairs and International Development of the House of Commons. In accordance with Section 108.2 and the motion had passed by the subcommittee on February 26, 2026, the subcommittee will meet for a briefing on the human rights situation in Iran. Today's meeting will be held in hybrid format in accordance with the House rules. Members may participate in person or over the Zoom application.
A few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. For those on Zoom, at the bottom of your screen, you can selection the appropriate channel for interpretation, English, French, or third language. For those in room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Friendly reminding also that this subcommittee focuses its activity on the international level, not domestic. Questions and answers should reflect that.
I would now like to welcome our first witness.
I'd like to welcome our first witness, Ms. Nazanin Boniadi. She is an activist in human rights, and she is with us by video conference. Here I have to say a few words. Unfortunately, when we recognize the people and we honor them, Madame Boniadi was not here. So now I am pleased to welcome you, and we are proud to announce to you that you were recognized by our committee as one of the greatest human rights activities. You are an activist who writes a new page in the history of a human being and the human rights. Thanks for the job you are doing. May God be with you in every steps you are taking in order to defend the human rights. Ms. Boniadi, welcome to our community, and I give you the floor for 5 minutes for your introduction. Please go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Thank you very much for the kind recognition. Members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to testify. Before I speak in my own voice, I want to begin with the words of someone who cannot be here today. This message was sent to me recently from a dissident in Iran. It's basically martial law here. Anyone who makes even the smallest move gets arrested. They check phones. They strip people to see if there are pellet wounds. And if they find any, they detain them. They threaten me too. If you make the slightest move, we'll raid your home and take you somewhere no trace of you will remain. This silence is suffocating me. My phone is tapped. They know where we live. In every alley, there's a memorial. Young people, beautiful like flowers, buried underground. I survived only because the bullets didn't find me. We, 90 million people, are prisoners and hostages. Without you, we are truly alone. Honestly, I kind of wish I could become one of the immortalized martyrs too. This is the psychological and physical reality of daily life for millions of Iranians. Human rights lawyers and experts are now warning that what is unfolding in Iran is not ordinary repression. It's a systemic assault on a civilian population that meets the legal threshold of crimes against humanity. To understand why Iranians continue to risk everything, it helps to understand how the Islamic Republic governs. Political legitimacy has historically rested on a social contract. The state provides security and sustenance in exchange for the people's consent. As the writer Karim Sajjadpour recently described, what exists in Iran is not a social contract. It's a predatory lease imposed in 1979 and long since expired. Iranians still live inside the fever dream of an intolerant cleric, Ayatollah Khomeini, who believed that economics was for donkeys. Their private lives are regulated, who they love, what they watch, what they wear. Women are treated as second-class citizens, beaten, imprisoned, and killed over a piece of cloth. Iranians endure rolling blackouts in a country rich in oil and gas. Their savings have been wiped out as inflation surges and the national currency loses over 99% of its value since the revolution. Their rivers have dried up, their lakes are vanishing, their nation's beloved capital, Tehran, is sinking as groundwater is pumped away. The state slogan are death to America, death to Israel, never long live Iran. Patriotism, the revolution's founder declared, was paganism. While citizens are told to endure austerity, a parallel state, dominated by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operates as a tax-exempt mafia, controlling ports, telecoms, and construction, while elites smuggle luxury goods through private terminals. When citizens protest these conditions, they are branded enemies of God. They are executed without due process under charges like corruption on earth. The Islamic Republic maintains the highest per capita execution rate in the world. This is not governance. It's an extraction, coercion, and terror. And now that system has entered its most violent phase. Credible reporting and testimonies from inside Iran indicate that since the nationwide uprising began in late December 2025, tens of thousands may have been killed. Human rights organizations stress that communication blackouts make all available figures a severe undercount. By scale, organization, and intent, this violence meets the legal threshold for the crime of extermination under the Rome Statute. Under the responsibility to protect, recognized in international law, this threshold triggers duty. Thousands of detained protesters now face the imminent threat of execution. Senior judicial authorities have warned that continuous protests may be prosecuted as waging war on God, a charge historically used to justify mass executions. The Iranian people have demonstrated agency, cohesion, and extraordinary courage. They have fulfilled their role, and the responsibility to protect now shifts outwards. For Canada, 6 actions follow directly from these obligations. First, protect civilians by degrading the regime's capacity to commit atrocities. Canada's leadership in designating the IRGC as a terrorist organization has already paved the way for others. That leadership must now be matched by coordinated multilateral enforcement, targeting its leadership, the IRGC's leadership, assets, and infrastructure. Second, impose sustained economic measures, freeze regime assets globally, and dismantle the clandestine tanker networks that finance this repression.
Yeah, but
Third,
please, if you could round it up, because we exceed by almost half a minute.
I'm so sorry. So I just want to close, actually. I can get to the other points. I want to close with a message because I brought you the message of somebody from Iran. So here's a final message from one of the bravest dissidents, Tumaj Salehi, who wanted me to share the following. For years, we have taken to the streets to claim our rights, for freedom and equality, for democracy, to close a wound that has been the source of bleeding for decades. We look to one another and rely on one another. But how long can we stand barehanded against bullets? Is our family of peace seekers going to leave us to face this alone? If this movement fails, it's not because Iranians lacked courage. It's because the world once again failed to meet them at history's edge. Thank you.
Thank you. It's touching. Thank you, Ms. Boniadi. And now we'll start with the first round.
تشکر میکنم خانم بنیادی از صحبتاتون. بسیار مفتخر هستیم از اینکه
allow you to finish saying some of the comments you might have. So if there were some remarks that you wish to get across, please feel free to share them now.
I very much appreciate that. Thank you very much. The third point I just wanted to make in the calls to action to guarantee the right to information and internet blackouts, of course, are stopping Iranians from communicating with each other, but also the outside world. And this isn't just a technical issue, it's a protection issue. The fourth point was to end impunity. Regime officials implicated in repression should be expelled from Canada, and legal proceedings initiated under universal jurisdiction should be initiated. The fifth point is to demand the immediate and unconditional release of all political prisoners. And the sixth and final point, move from severed relationships to formal non-recognition of the Islamic Republic. A regime that systematically wages war on its population has forfeited legitimacy. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that, and I really appreciate you having a chance to complete your thought, because those are essential recommendations that we will now carry forward. I mean, the occupation of this clerical military dictatorship of the Iranian people has been suppressing this ancient light, now penetrating through with the courage of their people. My question to you is this: the Cyrus cylinder sits in a the cracked case sits in a display at the United Nations in New York. Yet the United Nations itself has been one of the most, unfortunately, passive places when it comes time to actually fulfill the promise of Cyrus that every delegate has to pass through when they enter its halls. What is your message to Antonio Guterres, the United Nations, and its so-called human rights institutions, as so many thousands of Iranians are massacred by such a brutal regime?
That's a very poignant point that you made, because you're right, multilateralism has failed. Not only the Iranian people, I would argue the Venezuelan people and many others. Because when we take, as I did 3 years ago and other dissidents did recently before the UN Security Council, when we make these points and carry the voices of the people of Iran to the UN, not the repressive regime that is already platformed at the UN, we are met, of course, with roadblocks, because China and countries like China and Russia will always veto any meaningful action to curtail and stop the influence of the regime and to empower the Iranian people. So we have to find, as lawmakers across the world, and the free world essentially has to come together and find a better model to support peace, freedom, democracy, and human rights. And we are failing at this time.
Thank you. As you point out, the government in Beijing has been responsible for a $60 billion multi-year pact on prosperity and on security with the Iranian regime. And the government in the Kremlin has obviously a massive drone supply and munitions supply chain along with the Iranian regime. They both have an interest to preserve the supreme leader and its apparatus. When you think about how the IRGC, the Basiji, and others have been repressing the Iranian people, what is your view on how exactly they can be best supported against such violent regional dictators, but also a regime that's now increasingly a colonial project of these two neighbors?
I mean, we've called for, as the very brave dissident Tumaj Salehi said, we are barehanded, they are unarmed, and they are being targeted by war bullets. For peace advocates, as I am a peace advocate. What that means is you have to find a way to create peace in a situation where the state is waging war on its people. I'm not a politician, but all I know is that the responsibility to protect is something that exists under international law. And how that's going to be executed will require a very thoughtful multilateral approach. And it is going to require targeted action against the IRGC and the machinery of repression that is targeting innocent people.
Thank you. We have a couple of minutes left, and in that, capitals across Europe and including the United Kingdom in London are so slowly reacting to the realities of Iranians being massacred on their own streets. It has taken over a decade for them to even realize that the regime has been playing a shell game with them in the name of reform for all so long, all while pursuing regional terrorism and nuclear ambitions. What could you say to shake the capitals out of their hypnotic commitment to their past ideology, to act now, act today, and list the IRGC?
I mean, you have been leaders in Canada on this front, and we're very happy to see the EU has recently joined you, and the UK is now an outlier. So what we're saying to them is, are you going to catch up with the free world? Because at the moment, you've got the US, Canada, Australia, and Europe who have listed the IRGC. And the UK really does need to catch up and wake up to the reality that the Iranian people are the future and not this regime.
Thank you very much. If there's any comments you have left in the last 30 seconds or so, please feel free to share them now.
Just thank you to you all and for being leaders and for continuing to stand with the Iranian people. I would just urge you to please take note of the recommendations, the 6 recommendations, and I'd be happy to work with you on that front. Thank you.
Apparently, I still have another minute. Let me use it to ask you, the Iranian regime uses propaganda through proxy organizations in the Western world. What evidence do we see of that?
There are multiple, there's many videos online that show actually that they manipulate things like on Wikipedia, for example, and Wikicommons. So they will make sure that the primary videos and photos and sourcing points to Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader's propaganda and his website, and obviously regime officials are being platformed on in Western media. They're allowed to publish their op-eds while the internet blackout was happening. So what I would urge Western governments and media and institutions to do is ensure that those voices of the regime officials are not allowed to spew their propaganda and instead allow the people of Iran's voices to prevail.
Thank you very much. I'm looking now to the chair, for whom I'm convinced I've crossed the timeline by quite a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you. I invite Madame Vandenberg to take the floor for 3 minutes and a half. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'll be sharing my time with Mr. Assassi. And I just want to say, Ms. Bonyadi, how pleased we are that you're here. You should know that the recognition that was given to you by this committee is done unanimously by all parties. And so it is really the Parliament of Canada that is recognizing your work. And through you, the work of all of those incredibly brave people who are on the streets of Tehran and all over Iran right now fighting for their freedom. And I'd just like to ask you, thank you, by the way, for those 6 recommendations that you provided us. I think that is very, very useful. You have mentioned, and you said in your remarks, the importance of thoughtful multilateralism. Why is it important that what the international community does in support of the Iranian people, why is it important that it be done through multilateral efforts and and particularly if it does come to supporting, we hope, free and fair elections in Iran, why is it important that that be done through international support and not one or another country or power?
Thank you very much. I do want to take a second to dedicate this recognition to Toomaj Salehi and others. I carry Toomaj's voice today, and I want to make sure that he and others inside Iran who are languishing in jail, Fatima Sepehri, Narges Mohammadi, and countless, I can't name them all. So thank you. And to answer your question, the regime in Iran it has used this rhetoric of their slogan, their essential founding principles are death to America, death to Israel. They have killed people, executed people by falsely accusing them of being aligned with the US and Israel. All the more reason to make sure that this is not just something that is painted by the regime as supported by those 2 governments. It should be support. What should happen is that every freedom-loving country in the world and their governments should be supporting the efforts of a free, democratic Iran. And that's where multilateralism comes in, is to safeguard the idea that freedom is something that we all support, not just a couple of governments.
And you also talk about the internet blackout. The regime is going to great lengths to stop people from communicating the atrocities that are occurring. And there are ways, and I know that in other venues you've talked about things like satellite to cell technology or things that could be done to help get the communications going again. I wonder if you could elaborate on what it is that maybe Canada or other countries can do in that regard.
Thank you so much. Yes, I think efforts are being made to see if direct-to-cell might work, direct-to-cell satellite technology might work, and other ways. But essentially, what we need to do is down the line, if this type of thing happens again, we have to be ahead of it. It's not enough to be reacting. We have to be proactive. And so I really urge tech companies to work with governments and find a way to be proactive about this and not let it happen again.
Thank you, Anita. Mr. Hassasi, you have the floor for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Allow me to thank Ms. Boniadi. You have been such an incredible resource to us all. You're essentially on speed dial for us, so thank you for all of your efforts. I don't have much time, but just to put it in context for all the members of this committee and anyone else who is following, as you said, this is a government that is waging war on its own people. The numbers that we're seeing are truly, truly unprecedented. Do you know of any other instance in modern times where a government, a criminal government, has killed as many as we saw killed on the various streets across Iran in the last 40, 50 years? I just want to sensitize everyone to how horrid this actually is.
I'm sorry, I got cut off.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I was just wondering if in the modern era, in the last 40, 50 years, if you can think of any other country which has experienced something on the same scale as the criminal activity of the Iranian regime.
I'm sorry, Mr. Hassasi, I lost your voice for a second, but no, I can't imagine. Of course, Tiananmen Square, we saw with approximately 10,000 slaughtered, and that was horrific. The numbers have surpassed that by every indication that we're getting. At least 6,000 have been confirmed, and 17,000 something have been are under review. Some investigative reporters and medical doctors inside Iran are saying 33,000. But no, I would put this among, if not the greatest, essentially protest massacre since World War II.
Thank you. Do I have more time? Looking at your recommendation, they are all incredibly concrete. They're very effective. Which one do you think we will have the best chance of making sure that not only Canada, the U.S., and our allies would all adhere to? Because I do truly believe it's important that countries act together and make sure that we are not acting in isolation. So which one do you think we should be pushing the most?
It's hard to say because they all are sort of on equal footing. But I would say that since you're a leader on, isolating and holding the IRGC to account, that would be something that I would encourage you to talk to your British counterparts with and ensure that they do. But another one that I think not enough people are talking about is non-recognition. You have also led the way in 2012 of closing I believe it was 2012 where you closed the Iranian embassy in Canada. And I think the next logical step is non-recognition, meaning the Islamic Republic does not legitimately represent the Iranian people. Now, if we can get global consensus on that, then that would be fantastic.
Thank you, Mr. Hassasi. Now I invite Mr. Brunet Duceppe to prendre la parole pour 7 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You can take the floor, Mr. Brunet Duceppe. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Ms. Boniadi, is the interpretation working for you? Okay, great. Thank you. We're very happy to have you with us here today, Ms. Boniadi. I'd like to go along the same lines as Mr. Hassasi about Iran. You have witnessed the absurd actions of the regime in Iran. How is the current repression different from that experienced in Iran previously, such as the mass executions in 1988, for example?
Thank you for the question. Essentially, what happened in 1988 was the targeting of prisoners. So these are people who have already been captured. These are not protesters, right? So what we're seeing today is people protesting in the streets. And when I say prisoners, those were also dissidents. So it's not fair that they were imprisoned. They were imprisoned for political reasons. So that was also abhorrent. And today what we've seen is people taking to the streets, voicing discontent about this regime and being met with war bullets. The difference, of course, is today what we're seeing is unprecedented. It's the number one call that galvanizes and united people on the streets is death to Khamenei, and they don't want this regime anymore. Freedom, freedom, freedom. And that is really what's echoing is everyone is united. There isn't a faction that is not united around these slogans. So that's really the difference today. And of course, it leaves the regime with no way of dealing with it, but, you know, their usual repressive tactic, which is to crack down on protesters. What is unprecedented, of course, is the number of protesters that have been killed. And what we're not really looking at is the tens of thousands, and some are saying hundreds of thousands who have been imprisoned. And I'm hearing from inside Iran that prison cells are so, the prisons are so crowded now that people are cramped in spaces and not eating well, not being taken care of, and facing imminent execution. And that's another wave that can possibly happen in the very near future.
Merci pour ça. Il y a plusieurs experts internationaux qui...
Thank you for that. A number of international experts feel that the organization and intention of this repression represents a crime against humanity, and you mentioned that. Do you have any concrete examples that we could help us correct that and bring it into the public space later?
Human rights experts and lawyers have already pointed to the fact that this is classified under the Rome Statute as an extermination. When this number of people are targeted by the state, that's what it is. It's an extermination. And even if it's the 6,000, just over 6,000 names of people who have been confirmed killed, that is already a crime against humanity. But we're looking at far more than that, and far greater and more serious crime against humanity than that. And so with all the evidence, the video evidence that we're seeing, the senior officials in the health ministry who have told us that the numbers are likely to be quite high, definitely in the tens of thousands. There is no other way to address this than as a crime against humanity, as crimes against humanity, and that requires every government to come together and find a way forward to stop this from escalating even more.
À quel point est là?
At what point are there foreign powers working hand in hand with the Mullah regime and who are party to the crimes? I'm thinking here of China, which has made many energy agreements with Iran. Do you think that they are supporting the regime? And should they also be denounced by the various countries supporting the Iranian people?
I think there's a very clear alignment with certain authoritarian regimes that protect each other economically and policy-wise. And what we've failed to do in the free world is be as united against that despotism. if we are not able to align ourselves in a way that basically increases the cost of repression, increases the cost of collaboration with those who repress, then we are failing. And what are we protecting? We're not protecting democracy. We're not protecting freedom or peace. And people make the mistake of thinking that, when you see a crime happening in front of you, do you not go to the perpetrator of that crime and arrest them? Somebody inside Iran said to me, when I'm witnessing a crime, I call the police. Who are we supposed to call when our state is committing the crime? Surely we have to have a multilateral approach in international law that allows for a state to be arrested, so to speak. And we're not doing that. And that's for you. That's for people far smarter than me and more experienced than me to figure out how that should be done. But the mechanisms need to be in place, and we need to realize them with practical measures.
Quel message?
What message is sent to the Iranian people when countries like Canada, who recognize the reality of the crimes, but don't undertake concrete diplomatic measures? What message does it send to the Iranian people? Because we're all here around the table, and we all support the Iranian people and have for a long time. But despite all of this, there is a certain bit of hesitancy in countries like Canada, and their desire does not translate into concrete measures. We know that our Prime Minister has done trade deals with China. How can that be interpreted at times like this?
Quick answer, please. Time is over.
The quick answer is that we understand that every country has their own interests, best interests at heart, and that is understandable. I think what needs to happen is for countries to understand that as long as this regime stands, that is not in Canada's interest, that is not in the world's interest. And so finding a way to curtail the repression, not only domestically, but it would translate essentially, if you hold this regime to account, to a more peaceful region and a more stable world. So it is in your interest, it is in everybody's interest to side with the Iranian people.
Thank you. Myself and on behalf of this subcommittee, we would like to thank you for the time being here, the good answer illustrating this, all the members, and once again, congratulations for the good recognition you got it unanimously from this subcommittee. We highly, highly, highly respect the good job you are doing, your good efforts, and we wish you the best. Thank you.
I'm deeply grateful. Thank you. Thank you.
As we continue our meeting with our second panel, j'aimerais maintenant souhaiter
I would now like to welcome our witnesses.
Mr. Abiad, a student who represents most of the minority in Iran. We have Nazanin Afshin Jam Mackay from a human rights and democracy advocate. You're welcome. We have Athena Dayami, a human rights defender by video conference. You're welcome also. And from MacDonald Laurier Institute, we have Kavi Shahrouz, lawyer and senior fellow. From Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, we have our friend Brandon Silver, Director of Policy and Project. You're welcome. And we have Madame Kimberly Lenz, Program and Policy Officer. You're welcome to all of you. And we would like to start by giving every one of you 4 minutes for introduction. We'll start with Mr. Abiad. We have 4 minutes. Please go ahead.
Thank you, President Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ahwazi Popular Democratic Front, we would like to draw your attention to the grave and deteriorating situation facing non-Persian peoples within the geography of what is known as Iran, particularly following the events that took place from December 2025 to January 2026. These events marked a dangerous escalation in the level of repression and violence carried out by the Iranian authorities. In their aftermath, tens of thousands of civilians were killed in cold blood. These crimes were not isolated incidents. but rather part of a systematic policy aimed at silencing dissent and suppressing oppression nations. As a result, fear and terror have spread widely among non-Persian communities. Citizens now live under constant threat, fear of arrest, fear of enforced disappearance, and fear of collective punishment. Homes are raided, families are torn apart, and entire communities are intimidated simply because of their national, cultural, or linguistic identity. The Ahwazi Arab people have been among the most severely targeted. Arbitrary and mass arrests have intensified, affecting activists, intellectuals, workers, and ordinary civilians alike. Detention without charge, forced confessions, and unfair trials have become routine methods used to suppress any form of expression or resistance. However, repression is not limited to Ahwaz alone. Similar policies are systematically enforced against other non-Persian peoples, including the Kurds, Turks, Azerbaijans, and the Baluch. These communities face widespread discrimination, militarization of their regions, economic marginalization, and severe restrictions on their cultural and political rights. Their shared suffering reflects a broader pattern of state-sponsored oppression based on identity. Ahwaz has been under Iranian occupation since 1925. Since that time, the region has been subjected to policies of marginalization, demographic manipulation, and cultural erasure. Despite being one of the richest regions in natural resources, its indigenous population remains among the most impoverished. Ahwaz contains vast reserves of oil and gas and serves as a major center for petrochemical industries. It also possesses fertile agricultural lands, steel and iron industries, and numerous mineral resources. These resources contribute significantly to the Iranian economy, yet the people of Ahwaz are denied their fair share. Instead, they suffer from unemployment, environmental destruction, water shortages, land confiscation, and the suspension of their language and culture. Political participation and basic freedoms are systematically denied. What we are witnessing today is not merely an internal matter. It constitutes ongoing and serious human rights violations against entire nations living under state domination. The repression of Ahwazi, Arab Kurds, Turks, Azerbaijanis, and Baluch, and other non-Persian peoples expose a deeply rooted systematic discrimination within the political structure of the state. The Ahwazi Popular Democratic Front calls on the international community to break its silence, to listen to the voices of the oppressed, and to conduct independent investigations, and to hold those responsible for these crimes accountable. We demand an immediate end to mass arrests, extrajudicial killings, and collective punishment. We call for the release of all political prisoners and for the recognition of the legitimate rights of non-Persian peoples, including their right to dignity, justice, equality, and self-determination. The oppressed peoples of Iran are not asking for charity. They are demanding their fundamental human rights, the right to live freely on their land, to benefit from the resources, and to preserve their identity without fear. History has shown that oppression may silence voices temporarily, but it can never break the will of nations. The struggle for freedom, justice, and equality will continue until these rights are fully realized. Thank you.
It's good timing. Now I would like to invite Madame Nazanin Afshin Jam-Makey. You have the floor for 4 minutes. You're welcome. Go ahead.
De service en tant que défenseur des droits de la personne.
In my 23 years as a human rights and democracy defender, I've witnessed many atrocities committed by this regime, but I've never seen anything like what is going on today in Iran.
Anything like what is happening in Iran today. Parents sifting through warehouses filled with piles of body bags, desperately trying to find their loved ones. A modern-day massacre has taken place, and the killing continues. Suppression forces patrol the streets, arresting those with injuries or finishing them off with a bullet to the head, dumping them in mass graves, or injecting prisoners with lethal substances. After the last round of protests during Women Life Freedom, the UN fact-finding mission on Iran concluded that the regime had committed crimes against humanity. Yet the scale of violence we are witnessing now is unprecedented, including the use of military-grade weapons against peaceful protesters. As former UN prosecutor Payam Akhavan stated just a few days ago at the UN Human Rights Council, at least 33,000 Iranians have been killed. He noted that during the Srebrenica genocide, 8,000 Bosnians were killed, and the world responded. In Iran, 4 times that number were massacred in half the time. Ms. Bonyadi has already perfectly detailed some of this, so with your permission, I will move directly to recommendations. Because words of condemnation will not save lives. Les paroles de condamnation.
Words of condemnation will not save lives.
That Canada, over the years, has demonstrated leadership on this issue. First, by closing its embassy, and second, by listing the IRGC on the terrorist list. We can continue to build on that leadership. Former Canadian Minister of Justice Lloyd Axworthy helped develop the principle of the responsibility to protect, R2P. Today, we have the opportunity to put it into action. R2P is often misunderstood as requiring military intervention. In reality, it includes a broad set of tools that Canada is uniquely positioned to lead. First, Canada should convene a coalition of G7 countries to coordinate action, including urging those that have not yet done so, such as the UK, to designate the IRGC as a terrorist organization, and to recall ambassadors or close embassies of the regime. This coalition could coordinate targeted sanctions that truly cripple the regime, for example, sanctioning Arvon Cloud for its complicity in Iran's deliberate internet blackout. The US and the UK have already done so. Also seize regime assets and repurpose them to victims or for democracy efforts. Second, Canada should help Iranians by providing secure internet access, including satellite and VPN services such as Starlink and tools provided by Siphon. Siphon is a Canadian-based company started at the University of Toronto that in a single day provides secure VPN communication to almost 10 million Iranians. Even during blackouts, essential videos and footage were shared thanks to its new innovation called Conduit. The U.S. has been funding this organization for many years, and to meet increased demand, I believe Canada could do its part. Canada could also provide funding to independent, nonpartisan media broadcasting into Iran via satellite to counter regime propaganda and support democratic institution building.
If you could wrap it up this time.
Next, Canada could commit humanitarian aid and medical supplies in advance, ready for deployment when the regime falls. This is desperately needed as Iranian doctors are being targeted. Some have even received death sentences simply for treating the injured. Canada should activate universal jurisdiction and other legal mechanisms to hold perpetrators of crimes against humanity accountable, with the eventual goal of proceedings before the International Criminal Court. And in the meantime, the RCMP could open structural investigations into the situation in Iran instead of just deporting these regime officials. Lastly, Canada could support a crisis management center, a hub for Iranian technocratic experts to gather and prepare for post-regime transition. Words of condemnation will not save lives. In concert with our allies, if the political will is there, you have the power to help end this mass killing. You have the power to ensure a nuclear-free Iran. A free, democratic Iran means not only are Iranians safe, but Canadians, like Irwin Cotler and victims of transnational repression who require 24-hour police protection, and the world at large are also safer. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite Madame Atena Dayami to take the floor for 4 minutes, please. The floor.
Thank you very much for inviting me. I would like to speak directly about the current human rights situation in Iran. These days, many people inside Iran repeat a sentence that clearly shows the depth of the tragedy. I am ashamed to be alive. I wish I had been killed too. It reflects a deep wound and a heavy psychological burden on the collective memories of the Iranian society. Following economic collapse, the sharp fall of the national currency, and severe pressure on daily life, widespread public anger emerged across the country. Nationwide protests and strikes spread quickly. But from the very first days with violent repression, security and military forces acting on direct order from Ali Khamenei fired live ammunition at civilians. At the same time, the internet and even phone communications were completely shut down to prevent people from sharing information or asking for help. During this crackdown, security forces attacked hospitals. They either killed injured protesters with final shots or abducted them from medical centers. The fate of many of these people is still unknown. Among many own friends and acquaintances alone, at least 11 people were killed, including Aida Aghili, a woman who was shot twice in the head with live ammunition. According to data published by well-known human rights organization Harana, the number of confirmed deaths were 6,479, including 118 children under the age of 18. I must stress that this figure includes only cases that could be fully verified despite widespread internet shutdown. In addition, more than 17,000 deaths are still under investigation, and at least 11,020 people have been reported injured. Existing estimates indicate between 30,000 and 50,000 people have been killed. These numbers are not just statistics. Each number represents a human life and a destruction of a family. After the street protests decreased, repression entered a new phase. Violent arrests, summons, and fabricated charges, the presence of security forces in schools, pressure on students and their families, and tighter control over hospitals and medical centers. At the same time, security forces carried out house-to-house raids to confiscate satellite dishes and Starlink equipment. The Islamic Republic had demanded and collected large sums of money for their families to return bodies of their killed and for the simply of owning Starlinks and Starlink equipment, while the monthly minimum wage of a worker in Iran is extremely low. The situation of detained is also extremely alarming. I speak from personal experience, having spent 7 years in prison of the Islamic Republic, and I know very well what detainees are facing today: systematic tortures, beating, solitary confinement, denial of contracts with families, and fast-track trials without access to a lawyer, often leading to death sentences based on fabricated charges. So far, at least 281 forced confessions have been broadcast on state-affiliated media. Many reports also describe denial of medical care, forced injections or administration of unknown drugs, and inhuman detention conditions cause for severe overcrowding and lack of water, food, and basic necessities. More than 20,000 protesters, lawyers, nurses, doctors, university students, and school students have been arrested so far. For years, Iranians have peacefully demanded an end to the Islamic Republic. وقتتون گذشته. However, it was repression, imprisonment. What has folded these days, and our President Max گفتم بهشون.
متشکرم از شما. میخوام دعوت بکنم آقای کوه شهروز که اینجا برای 4 دقیقه اینجا رو وقت بگیره. تشکر میکنم آقای رئیس در ارتباط کمیته.
In Iran. Each time I warned that the situation was awful. Today I'm here to say that the situation is catastrophic. Iranians face a human rights crisis with few parallels in contemporary history. It's an emergency that should compel Canada and the entire democratic world to act. Governments that truly represent their people do not need to slaughter their citizens and hide what they're doing from the world by shutting off the internet. But the more a regime's legitimacy drops, the more it's forced to use violence and fear to make up for that deficit. Iran's regime is lashing out today because it has lost all legitimacy. All it has left is naked violence and state terror. For years, the Islamic regime claimed that it could protect Iran from foreign threats. That illusion is gone thanks to the humiliation it suffered during the 12-day war with Israel. In that war, Israel showed the world that Iran's regime cannot control its skies, it cannot protect its top military officials, and cannot even provide its citizens with bomb shelters. For years, the Islamic regime tried to project strength through its proxies. but those proxies, like Hezbollah and Hamas, have now collapsed or been severely degraded. Gone also is Bashar al-Assad, who killed hundreds of thousands of his own citizens at the Iranian regime's say-so. Domestically, too, the regime is desperate and out of options. In 1979, when this regime took power, $1 US bought 70 rials. Thanks to sanctions imposed because of the regime's criminally foolish efforts to obtain a nuclear weapon, thanks to the regime's utter incompetence and mismanagement, and thanks to the nation's wealth being squandered in Syria and Lebanon and Gaza, and thanks to truly staggering levels of corruption among the upper ranks of the regime, today that same US dollar buys over 1 million rials. This is economic destruction. Iran's people are increasingly and in large numbers falling into poverty. And it doesn't end there. Because of criminal levels of mismanagement and corruption by what has been called a water mafia, Iran is literally running out of water. The so-called president of the country has talked about moving the capital because there is not enough water for the people of Tehran. It's not diplomatic to use such language, but for all the reasons that I just stated, and many, many more, Iran's regime today is like an aggressive, rabid animal that is cornered. And because it is cornered, it's lashing out in ways that are hard for those of us who live safely in Canada to even fathom. When Iran erupted in late December and early January with anti-regime protests, this rabid, illegitimate, cornered regime did the only thing that regimes like this do to maintain power. It opened fire, and it did not stop until the country was overrun with blood. By the very conservative estimates of the human rights activist news agency, Hirana, 6,842 people were killed by the regime over the span of just a few days, with 146 of them being under the age of 18. Hirana also reports over 11,000 injured. And as I said, these are very conservative estimates. Now that the internet is beginning to return to Iran, we're beginning to hear casualty rates in the tens of thousands. For the crime of wanting an end to dictatorship, for the crime of wanting to end gender and religious apartheid, and for the crime of wanting to be able to feed their kids and have drinking water, thousands upon thousands of Iranians were killed and dumped in morgues, put in what has become the dark, enduring symbol of the Iranian regime's crimes against humanity, the black body bag. So in the face of this crisis, I ask, nay, implore Canada's government not to be silent. I implore you to loudly say that this regime has committed mass human rights violations and that its leaders must face international criminal justice. Iran is not a party to the Rome Statute of the International Court, but there are ways through the UN Security Council that its leaders can still be indicted by the ICC. Canada should push the global community for such an outcome. I implore you to work to provide funding for Starlink terminals to Iranians because the Islamic regime will continue to shut the internet off to commit atrocities. I implore you to use legislation that we already have to identify and deport regime officials who have come to Canada and who have brought their families here, and to seize the assets of those who have brought money here. This is blood money that's pumping through our housing markets and our banks.
If you could wrap it, please, you exceed by 1 minute already.
Sure. I implore you to allow, after proper vetting, of course, to allow more refugees from Iran. Each time there are mass protests in Iran, brave men and women who have to escape to nearby countries. Let Canada be a safe haven to them and not to the rich regime officials and their children. And most importantly, I implore you to say loudly and publicly, and say it as a matter of formal Canadian policy, that the Islamic regime in Iran is illegitimate and needs to go. Adopting a policy like that is not common in international relations, but we did it with another repugnant regime of the modern era, that of apartheid South Africa. Today, we clearly recognized evil and stood up to it. And Iran's regime, a regime that puts thousands in black body bags solely for wanting their rights, is no less evil. And I implore you to stand up to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now I would like to invite Mr. Brandon Silver to take the floor for 4 minutes.
Honorable député, merci pour l'opportunité de vous.
Honourable members, thank you for the opportunity to join you today.
Victims of atrocities and political prisoners, we have seen the horrifying human stories that underpin the staggering statistics of abuse in Iran. Iran has the highest rate of child executions in the world, the highest per capita rate of executions more generally, the highest rate of state hostage takings, and the highest per capita rate of imprisonment of journalists. This has real and tangible costs for Canadians. It meant the murder of Montreal photojournalist Zahra Kazemi, the hostage takings of Professor Maria Mombaini and Saeed Malikpour, the killing of Canadian passengers of flight PS752, the murders of 8 Canadians on October 7, 2023, and now the atrocities ongoing as we speak, where authorities are confirmed to have killed Canadians and likely will continue doing so. None of these Canadians receive justice, and their killers and kidnappers enjoy impunity. They are now committing these crimes again as we meet here today. Canada has the authority to investigate and prosecute these crimes. The criteria established by the RCMP for opening a structural investigation has clearly been met. These crimes against humanity that are occurring have a strong nexus to Canada. There are Canadian victims. Many in the Iranian community here in Canada can provide evidence to the RCMP, and perpetrators are likely to be caught in Canada. Announcing the opening of an investigation would send a message of solidarity to victims, of accountability to violators, and assert the value of Canadian citizenship. It would protect our sovereignty, establishing consequences for murdering Canadians and demonstrating that their murderers are not welcome in Canada. The gathering of evidence through a structural investigation would assist with prospective prosecutions in Canada or with mechanisms abroad. It would also assist the Canadian Border Services Agency to identify and deny entry to perpetrators, many of whom are likely to come to Canada as conditions in Iran continue to deteriorate. Again, 2 separate United Nations independent expert bodies have determined that the actions of these perpetrators may constitute crimes against humanity. They should be investigated and prosecuted as such. Canada has an opportunity and a duty to lead on behalf of the victimized Canadians left without justice, on behalf of the brave Iranians on the front lines of the fight for our common humanity, and on behalf of our country's foundational principles of justice and the rule of law that is currently under global assault. Thank you.
Now I'd like
میخوام خانم کیمبرلی رو دعوت کنم که صحبت بفرمایه. اونچه که
Republic's widespread crackdown on peaceful protesters and its external aggression abroad. The sheer scale of the regime's systematic brutality is unprecedented. By conservative estimates, as we have heard, at least 33,000 Iranians have been massacred, with credible assessments ranging far higher. Experts describe it as the worst mass killing in Iran's modern history, and others conclude it meets the legal threshold for crimes against humanity. The killings continue, and the regime's judiciary has announced the imminent execution of thousands of detainees. Alongside this, Canada and liberal democracies face escalating threats from the Islamic Republic and its proxies. CSIS, the G7, and a broad coalition of democracies have warned of growing transnational repression and lethal threats. This is an historic and pivotal moment. Canadian leadership would build on mounting political momentum to deny the regime the freedom to operate with impunity. We urge the Canadian government to target the architect of these threats, the IRGC, by dismantling its networks through 2 key measures. First, Canada should promote and support prescription of the IRGC as a terrorist entity with like-minded partners, particularly the UK, where parliamentarians are pressing for the rapid adoption of enabling legislation and the group's designation. Second, it should deepen coordination with allies, including the European Union, which unanimously agreed on its designation last week. Enhanced intelligence sharing, law enforcement and judicial collaboration, and sanctions alignment would strengthen national and global security. Iranians continue to rise up against the regime's tyranny and to risk their lives in pursuit of a secular, democratic Iran grounded in human rights. Canada must respond with urgency and resolve. Thank you for the opportunity.
Now would like to start with the first round of question and answer, and I would like to invite Mr. Majumdar to take the floor for 7 minutes. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for bearing testimony to a people who are under such brutal subjugation by a brutal regime. Ms. Nazanin Afshinjan-McKay, I would like to ask you my first question. You cautioned about regime propaganda that is being deployed in its own self-preservation. You mentioned in your testimony that they might use deceased victims they murdered and massacred, and pre-position them in light of a potential attack on their own regime brutality and their own regime infrastructure. Could I ask you to take a couple minutes to kind of expand upon what Canadians in the world need to prepare to see in how the regime intends to propagandize the murdered in its own self-defense?
Absolutely. When I was speaking earlier about families having to root through body bags, what we've noticed is that there's less women and children. So Iranians started to ask the question, where are the women and children? And it wasn't just because of the disproportionate number of men who were out on the streets, because what differentiates this round of protests from the last ones, it involved a cross-section of society from all ages, classes, ethnicities, etc. It was a full national revolution, and when they were searching, they weren't finding the men and the women and children, and what was discovered was that they are preserving these bodies in refrigeration trucks and in warehouses so that in the event of a foreign intervention, they can use these bodies as evidence of the deaths committed by foreign countries like the United States or Israel. So they will use every means, every opportunity to point the blame at someone else or another country other than themselves.
It's brutal testimony to offer, and I'm grateful for your candor. I know it's not easy to talk about human beings suffering this type of abuse, once being murdered and being twice victimized as being a prop to protect a regime. I've had experience with confronting this regime as early as 2006 in Iraq and in Afghanistan, where they have pursued some of those vile tactics we've ever seen in the history of warfare. The imagination and ambition they bring is based upon a values set that I think many in the Western world don't necessarily appreciate. It is not a culture of life. It is a celebration of death, a nihilistic ambition to eradicate people, and a sectarian ambition to control the world, if not the region, to start. Mr. Shahrouz, I'm going to turn to you now. Your powerful testimony implored Canadian leaders to do more than talk, do more than issue statements. From January until now, the government of Canada has been abysmally silent. And I wanted to give you a minute to expand upon your thinking about, in a real world, what would you have preferred to see your government do, a government that is supposed to represent murdered victims of PS752 families, murdered prisoners, tortured prisoners, prisoners that are still held in Evin Prison. Tell us and share with Canada your perspective, please, sir.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Majumdar. Yes, I think, regrettably, what we've heard from our government has been, in my view, woefully inadequate. We've heard statements of condemnation, which are welcomed, but I think there really needs to be much more. Canada has a unique role to play. Canada is home to a very, very large Iranian-Canadian population, as we can see from the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands on the streets in the last few weeks. Canada really should take a leadership role in the world. So a lot of what I mentioned in my testimony is kind of what Canada should be doing. So first and foremost, Canada has regrettably become a safe haven to regime affiliates. I think that's really where we should begin. We now have the tools with the IRGC terror listing and with certain changes to our immigration policies to go after folks that have ties to the regime and to seize their assets, to kick them out of the country, and to ensure that those with ties to the regime don't come here. Regrettably, there has been too little enforcement of that. Since those laws went into effect, as far as I know, very little has actually been done to combat the many, many regime affiliates in this country. Regrettably, our IRGC listing has made life very difficult for conscripts who didn't want to serve in the IRGC. Their lives have been made difficult, but those with more substantial ties to this terrible, terrible institution have not been prosecuted. So that's a place to start. But also, I think Canada should take a leadership role globally. We took this step many, many years ago, where we closed our embassy and we kicked out the Iranian ambassador. That's something that also the rest of the democratic world really needs to do, and Canada should take a leadership role in that. We have regrettably been too silent in that. I think our general policy ought to be, as I mentioned in my testimony, that this regime is illegitimate and needs to be treated as a pariah state in every sense, and Canada should really play an important role in that.
Thank you for your testimony. I defer my remaining minute to MP Cronus.
I'm just going to ask a quick follow-up to your comments. You mentioned regime affiliates, and I'm wondering if you can comment on the ways that the IRGC is using other issues and those affiliates to support their campaign in Canada.
Well, the IRGC, aside from being a brutal military force, is also a very, very powerful and corrupt economic force in Iran. And it has affiliations with all sorts of bad actors around the globe, terrorist organizations, criminal gangs, and so on. And so what it has done is, through that economic power, it has managed to engage in all sorts of nefarious activities in the region and globally. And in Canada, what it has done is that there are people with ties to that organization that have found their way here, that have stashed their money in our banks, in our, they've invested it in property and businesses and so on. And that's really what we ought to be combating. We now have the tools to do it. We just need the political will to actually take action.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Cronus. I would like to invite Mr. Ehsassi take the floor for 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you also to all the witnesses. You have been focused on human rights violations in Iran, or more broadly, for many, many years. So I think we all owe you a great debt of gratitude. You're not just here because of the events that have taken place in the course of the past month, but for the hard work that you've been doing year in, year out. So if I may, let's start off with Ms. Afshinjam. You pointed out rightfully how important technology is and how we should harness all the tools at our disposal to make sure that the horrific practice of this regime to cloak everything in darkness never happens again. You spoke about, and I had never heard about this specific organization, you spoke about Arvan Cloud and the fact that the UK and the US have already listed them. I think that's a very good suggestion that we start there, but would you mind sharing with us what the significance of this organization is?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Ehsassi. Arvan Cloud played a huge role in the regime's intranet project. They controlled and censored versions of the internet inside Iran. So they are directly involved and implicated in these internet blackouts where thousands of people were murdered, not just this time in these protests, but during the bloody November where 1,500 people were killed in a matter of days. So I don't know the tech, I don't know too much about the tech that goes behind it, but I would encourage your subcommittee one day to invite Mr. Mehdi Yahyannejad, who leads a technology guild, so to speak, with a lot of different Iranian diaspora groups that are involved in the tech sector. He's an expert in this, and he would be very well suited to answer some of these questions.
That's a great suggestion, and I will follow up on your recommendation. I will reach out to Mr. Yahyannejad. I'm sure he has very compelling evidence as to why the UK and US did this, and I'm sure
he is also responsible for delivering thousands of Starlinks inside Iran.
Absolutely, for sure. Thank you for that. So I do undertake to do so. With respect to the other instrument you mentioned, Siphon. As you know, Siphon was developed at the University of Toronto by Citizens Lab. It is important that we do everything possible to utilize their tools. Do you know of any other government that has actually used their technology, has either put in big orders, or because the more we have, the more examples we have, the more easy it is for us to try to push our government officials to do likewise. So if you know of any examples where other governments have actually used their technology or obtained their technology, we'd be grateful to
the United States has been funding this particular organization for many years because they are the largest company that serves VPNs to Iranians, and they've had great success. And as I said, they have a new technology called Conduit, which, again, I'm not a tech expert, but what I understand is it allows regular citizens to donate their internet bandwidth to those inside Iran. So Iranians are able to utilize that and send communication and photos and videos in a situation like a blackout. It is a real lifesaver. This is not just about communicating back home to see how mom is. This is actually saving lives.
Thank you for that, for your guidance. Mr. Shahrouz, regarding Starlink, I remember this has been a recurring issue. We have all mentioned the need to do this for the past 3 years. I assume the price of Starlink has actually plummeted in terms of how expensive it is to obtain their units. As was mentioned previously, some units have made their way into Iran. Do you know of any government that has actually gone out there, paid for Starlink to be used in various countries? Again, I use it not because I want to say I actually agree with everything you guys have said. I just want to have more compelling examples for us all to use.
Yeah, that's an excellent question. To my knowledge, the folks that my colleague, Ms. Afshinjan McKay, mentioned, who work on sending Starlink to Iran, Mr. Yahyajnejad, other Iranian activists, they have relied on funding, either direct or indirect, from the United States government. Obviously, the United States has not funded it directly or sent Starlink directly, but they've funded civil society groups that are engaged in this. Whether the EU has engaged in this, I'm not quite sure, but I know for certain that the US has. And I think that's really an important model for us in Canada to be able to follow. Again, as my colleague mentioned, this is a matter of life and death. The reason they shut down the internet is twofold. One, to prevent people from being able to organize and coordinate, and secondly, for their crimes not to be reported in real time. So being able to combat that really makes the difference between life and death for thousands of people.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Now, if we could go to Mr. Silver, who we've had the pleasure of having here on many occasions as well, given his expertise. You talk about the significance of prosecutions, and you also reminded us that this Iranian regime has acted with impunity for many, many years, how important it is to hold him to account. What are some of the impediments insofar as the machinery of government is concerned with prosecutions? Perhaps if you opened up that particular issue again, we could do a better job on our end trying to encourage the machinery of government here in Canada to come to life.
Well, engaging, perhaps directly
it's
with...
possible a quick answer, please, because time is...
Sure. I would encourage, the committee to consider, posing these questions to the government and to those responsible for carrying out these prospective investigations and prosecutions. Again, all a structural investigation calls for is, the opening of the relevant resources to look into these crimes against humanity. It would mean interviewing Iranian Canadians about crimes they may have witnessed, and looking into the matter of vis-a-vis passive jurisdiction of Canadians who were killed or harmed in Iran, of which Minister Anand has publicly acknowledged there were. We have done so consistently and concertedly vis-a-vis Ukraine and Daesh crimes against Yazidis. So clearly the machinery of government and resources are there when it comes to other jurisdictions and crises, and certainly crimes against Canadians in Iran would merit so as well.
Thank you. Thank you. Monsieur Brunet-Duceppe, à vous la parole pour 7 minutes. Sorry.
You have the floor for 7 minutes, Mr. Brunet-Duceppe. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I hope everyone can hear the interpretation. Ms. Daimi, I have a question for you. Obviously, you're in contact with many people in Iran and overseas, and the fact that some people can live overseas, including in democratic countries like Canada. Does that have an impact on the feeling of power, of impunity, or the safety of some Iranians in the diaspora?
از من پرسیده شد سوال. بله. من میتونم بگم که بله قطعا تاثیر داره که
Yes, I can say that for sure the diaspora living outside, and whatever way you can support the Iranian of Iran, especially political prisoners and those who are in the death row. Myself, I was in prison. And people who were campaigning for support me, it was very effective, and it was effective with the way they were treating me, and it was kind of security that would create for me. Not that they wouldn't do anything, but they were cautious of how they behave. The support from outside of Iran, the loud voices for the people of Iran and the prisoners, it will causes the Iranian government to treat Iranians with caution. And I believe that if the global world would make us a wall against it, perhaps we would not be observing such atrocity against the human rights. And I think it would be effective. Yeah.
Thank you. It's Mr. Silver, it's because of me that you're here today. I appreciate your presence. The organization and scope of repression in Iran has met the legal threshold of crimes against humanity. Can you explain what that means concretely, the threshold for crimes against humanity?
Monsieur le député, pour cette...
Thank you, sir, for that very important question. At this and the commitment of this subcommittee, the United Nations has said on two separate occasions.
To English, please excuse me. One, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, which is a group of independent experts who analyze the deprivation and detention of individuals, has determined in specific Canadian cases that Iran's quote-unquote policy and practice of hostage-taking constitute crimes against humanity. It's noteworthy in that this was a quasi-judicial decision rendered in the case of Canadians being kidnapped in Iran. Nothing was done about that decision. This was years ago. Now, a second independent UN body, the fact-finding mission on Iran, has again determined that crimes against humanity have been met. There are a number of considerations: scope, scale, widespread and systematic nature of the engagement, but we need not go into what constitute crimes against humanity. Oftentimes, it is prima facie. We see, based on the testimony, the very moving and eloquent remarks of my colleagues on the panel here, that what we are seeing in Iran is unprecedented and demands global justice. And Canada can be a leader here. There is an opportunity that exists within our laws, within our frameworks, to stand up, speak out, and take action on behalf of the brave Iranian people, and in particular because of Canadians who have both historically and currently been affected by this regime, whether on Canadian soil or within Iran.
Justement,
based on your own work and public reports about some 700 affiliated individuals related to the IRGC currently reside in Canada. The RCMP spoke about it. You spoke about it, and there will be a structural inquiry because there are serious allegations of transnational crime. All of the ingredients are there for the RCMP to trigger such an investigation, and I understand that you can't tell the police what to do, but do you think that all of the factors are there to trigger such an investigation?
There is a very strong Canadian nexus, both in terms of passive jurisdiction. The victims have been Canadian, again, both historically and currently, and also prospectively in terms of active jurisdiction. There is a high likelihood that some Canadians may even be involved in perpetrating the crimes when you consider that there are 700 IRGC connected individuals alleged to be in Canada, and likely more to be fleeing the regime or may have some connections in Canada. There's a good chance that not only are the victims Canadian, but there may be some perpetrators who are Canadian, and there's certainly the presence in Canada of perpetrators regardless. And again, as some of my colleagues on the panel have mentioned, firstly, while we commend the actions that the Canadian government have taken under the Immigration Refugee Protection Act to exclude the entry of members of the IRGC, the fact is that there are many that are already here and many that are likely to evade those important policies and provisions. So A, when some of these officials are caught in Canada, they should not be deported back to Iran to keep killing people, which is the current policy of the Canadian government. They should be prosecuted when they're caught here. They should stand trial in Canada, and their victims, who are often in Canada, can take the stand and educate the world about what's happened. And secondly, it would assist in ensuring that they don't end up in Canada if we were to undertake this structural investigation and make sure that Canadian Iranian victims who, as Nazanin shared earlier today, often witness the jailers, judges, and police officers who persecuted them in the Canadian streets, so they can be sharing, they have a single destination to be sharing this information with law enforcement so that can be acted upon, and similarly exclude these perpetrators from entering our country in the first place.
Madame.
Thank you for that, Ms. Afshinjan McKay. You talked about Erwin Kotler earlier, and the question I asked earlier is the following. How can we feel safe when we know that we're in a democratic country, but I'll take the example of Mr. Kotler, and we passed a motion to denounce the aggression against him. Can we feel safe when we freely and openly oppose the regime?
For 20 seconds.
Again, I'll also answer in English just to make it quick. No, the answer is no. We do not feel safe. You know, we all escaped Iran. Myself in 1979 at the start of the revolution when my father was tortured and almost executed by the Revolutionary Guard. And we came here to have a safe life, to have freedom, to have democracy, to have the things that every human being should have. But instead, what I do is I look over my shoulder. Every time when I came in here, I looked behind me to see who is in this room, who might be from the regime, who might be standing at the corner when I get outside. This is not just to myself. We all feel it, and it's not just the activists. It's regular people who are just even going out to protest, because you know what happens the next day? Their family gets a call inside Iran. They say, I saw your daughter out in the protest. You better stop them or you're going to be victimized next. So none of us feel safe, and this should not be the feeling that we have here in Canada. We need to put an end to this regime so that not only do our Iranian brothers and sisters feel safe back home, but that Canadians feel safe. And Erwin Kotler is not even Iranian. The Islamic Republic of Iran is the biggest exporter of terrorism on the planet, supplying billions of dollars to Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis. This regime has caused so much terror in the world. They've bombed the Amia embassy in Argentina. They've They've employed Hell's. This is my
we'll
last
give you a
point.
chance.
They've
2 minutes.
sorry, just this last point. They've hired Hell's Angels here in Canada to assassinate a couple in Maryland, Washington.
Okay. Sorry, because I have to be fair with everyone. I'm sorry. I invite Mr. Zubair to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Chair, and to all the witnesses for being here and sharing with all of us in the committee, but also all those watching what's happening in Iran. And, you know, I think I'd like to ask you, there's a lot of people learning about what's happening in Iran, and a lot of people who are dialed in as you are, knowing what's happening, following. What advice would you give to those who are dialed in order to effectively communicate with the Canadian population about what is happening on the ground? Do you have any advice? Maybe I'll open it up, the floor. I just feel that there is somewhat of a disconnect between the average Canadian, even those who care about human rights, and those who know what's happening within Iran.
Anyone would like to answer, please? Okay, go.
Excellent question. I think there's a couple of things that I would like to communicate to average Canadians who care about human rights but maybe aren't following this story as closely. First of all, I think it's important for them to know what Iranians are fighting for. Iran is, for all intents and purposes, an apartheid state. It is apartheid. It is an apartheid state based on gender, based on religion, based on ethnicity. Its economy is in free fall. It is, as I mentioned in my remarks, it cannot provide water. The very basics of life it cannot provide to its people. So I think Canadians should understand the level of desperation that Iranians feel for having lived under this regime for nearly 50 years. So that's point one that I would make. And the second thing that I'd want to communicate to your average Canadian is a point that's been made a couple of times here on this panel. This is not simply an Iran problem. This is also a Canada problem. This is a problem where our former Attorney General and Minister of Justice has to live with security because this regime is going to try to kill him. It is a problem when the IRGC shoots down a plane and kills many, many Canadian citizens and permanent residents. The problem will not stay confined there. We have to deal with that regime there so that we can live safely here.
And thank you. And if others have points that haven't been mentioned yet, I'd like to open it up.
Sure, thank you, MP Zuberi. If I may, it'd be remiss not to mention the cases and causes of political prisoners. They are a looking glass into the wider mass domestic repression and external aggression in Iran. One particular case, Dr. Ahmed Reza Jalali, for whom the Raoul Wallenberg Center serves as legal counsel, is one of the longest held political prisoners in Iran. He is also a hostage, a dual Swedish-Iranian national who has been sentenced to execution simply for being a doctor, for helping people. And that tells a human story that the statistics sometimes belie, and that requires global action and attention. Even pariah states, when they know they're being scrutinized, that could have a life-saving effect on individuals like Dr. Jalali. But again, it exemplifies the broader policy issues at play, the weaponization of the judiciary of state violence enforced to arbitrarily detain foreign nationals and to target, as Nazanin shared in her testimony, doctors who are treating sick patients are criminalized. Lawyers who are serving as counsel to the innocent are jailed. And journalists who are simply reporting the news are harassed and murdered. And it's important to shine a global spotlight on this and seek to redress it. So there was discussion of targeted Magnitsky sanctions earlier, and simply take the opportunity to reaffirm and reiterate the urgency of pursuing this. While Canada has commendably implemented extensive targeted sanctions, we have missed the foremost architect of all of these crimes you've heard described today, and that is the Ayatollah. There is no valid argument against sanctioning a head of state. We've done so with Nicolas Maduro and Vladimir Putin. We should do so with the Ayatollah and with all of those who are the architects of the ongoing repression in Iran, both to name and shame them and to ensure that, again, our Canadian sovereignty and standards are not being corrupted by the corrosive influence of their ill-gotten gains and where they may send their family members or even themselves invest or launder their money in Canada. It would send a powerful statement of solidarity with the Iranian people. So again, I would, just to reiterate our recommendations, sanction the Ayatollah and the architects of repression, launch a structural investigation into crimes against humanity, and engage bilateral, multilaterally in the UK, within the G7, to ensure our allies proscribe and share intelligence and act against the Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have? Moment. Okay. I just, in the rest of the testimony, I hope to hear more about what's happening with the prisoners and what we can do to support them, those who are right now imprisoned.
Thank you, Mr. Zubairi. Now I'd like to ask Ms. Kronos to take the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and especially now that I have a little bit more of an opportunity, first of all, I want to thank you all for sharing your experiences, your vulnerabilities, and your fears, especially Ms. Dami, who's doing it in the middle of the night. It's almost 2 o'clock in the morning where she is. And I really want to acknowledge those statements because the Persian community in my riding has been desperately worried about their loved ones. And more than that, they've been, in many cases, reliving experiences of their own that caused them to come to Canada. And, you know, the issue is one that's also deeply personal for me because 30 years ago, the Iranian regime sponsored a suicide bus bombing that killed one of my friends and classmates, Elisa Flato. And so the reason I bring that up is because of the longitudinal aspect of this. There have been a variety of sanctions against Iran over the years. There have been statements by governments, there have been UN resolutions, there have been lawsuits, there have been targeted strikes. There have been a lot of measures taken over the decade, all to no avail because it's a regime that has persisted. And so, Ms. Asham-Jam McKay, I would like to start with you and just ask for your perspective on what keeps the Iranian regime going. Why does this regime continue to survive?
The regime continues to survive because it sucks the blood out of every single Iranian person, whether it's their money, their dignity, their human rights. They have amassed it. And what do they do with it? Instead of serving its people, what it does is it spends on terrorism and repression and hypes up its own mafia, because the IRGC really is like a mafia who hold really the purse strings of the entire nation. So they help one another. At the same time, authoritarian regimes, neighboring ones, prop up this particular regime. They feed off of the same repression handbook, and they don't end up serving their own people. So, yeah, I'll just stop there.
I just want to make sure that I give my colleague MP Ho a chance to also ask some questions.
Hi, my question is for Ms. Asham-Jam McKay. So you mentioned that a role for Canada to play in to support a crisis management center for technocratic experts during a potential regime transition if or when that happens. So could you expand on that a little bit more and what you think the role of transitional leaders can play?
Yes. So when the Women, Life, Freedom revolutionary protests happened, at that time, I noticed there was a lot of duplication of work among different Iranian diaspora groups. Maybe 5 people were creating databases on who had been killed, who had been injured. And so one by one, I started to ask some of these Iranian diaspora groups to come together to share so that they could form synergies, so they could be more efficient and effective. And what I realized by the end of it, we had amassed 100 Iranian diaspora groups and 200 very prominent, active Iranian diaspora leaders, with varying technocratic degrees of expertise in various fields, from communication to human rights to medical. And I realized, you know, we're all these different single entities and islands. If we can somehow centralize this, we could be so much more efficient. And so that's the premise on that. And we're already working together, and we're doing great things. But I think if the government of Canada, for example, were to give us a venue or some support, we could really expand and have way more output and productivity.
With my final question, I guess, do you think there's a role to play for perhaps Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi in that transitional phase? Or if you could elaborate on that in any way.
Myself or anybody? Absolutely. Crown Prince Reza Pahlavi he's called himself the transitional leader of this movement. And while many people follow him and agree with his stance, there are other people from other ethnic communities and political leanings that see a different transitional leader in their own communities. But I believe that the Crown Prince could have that very strong unifying capacity if he were to open up to these different groupings and allow for a checks and balance and a sort of a council of representatives that would help guide that transitional phase.
Thank you. Thank you. Now I would like to invite Monsieur Brunet Disseb. À vous la parole pour 5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Silver, I'd like to ask you a question based on your expertise once again. The generalized and systemic character of these violations, is it clearly established today?
Yes, there is clearly crimes against humanity that have been committed and that are ongoing as we speak and that meet the thresholds for a structural investigation. That the RCMP on its website, if you were to go to the structural investigation and sensitive investigation page of the RCMP, they set out their criteria for the opening of a investigation into crimes against humanity, and very clearly those standards have been met.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Silver.
Thank you very much, Mr. Silver. Mr. Abayat, you didn't have the opportunity to speak much. I'll give you a bit of time. Perhaps you'd like to add something that hasn't been said in responses. Do you have something that you would like to add for the committee's benefit?
I think my colleagues did a great job on including everything that was said, but what I would like to include is more about the Ahwazi people, what they've been going through. Same as everyone else. The only thing that's not being shown is it's not being talked about as much as the Iranians. So the Ahwazi People's Committee, everything that's going on currently, it's not being talked about, and it's being, as a sense, like it's gone unnoticed, right? It's similar to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but the only thing that's different is that it's not talked about. The Ahwazi people go through the same thing. Everything is similar, and they've been getting tortured, they've been getting killed, they've been getting everything that's been happening to them is just going against everything that's humanitarian correct. So, as everyone said, what I want to touch base on is I hope that we can find a solution to get Ahwazi people's voices more awareness.
Madam Ashwin.
Ms. Ashwin Jam McKay, I'd like to come back to the colleague by my last conservative colleague, because I think we can address more delicate questions. We as MPs have been approached by all sorts of people to weigh in, and in the case of Iran, we have been approached by proponents of the son of the Shah, by the Iranian resistance, Ms. Ashvadi. Yes, thank you. And so, shouldn't we ensure that, first and foremost, we focus on the actions of the current regime and be prudent before we take a position with some groups? I'm not saying that they're because some are perhaps more controversial than others.
People are united. We're united on the fact that we all want a change of regime. We want democracy. We want the rule of law. We want a constitution based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We are all united on this front. Just as we have here, there's a diversity of political alignment. So I think what's prudent at the moment is to put our political differences aside. I think as a parliamentarian, you should meet with all voices, but understand that in the end of the day, we all are fighting for the same thing. And when the regime falls and we are presented with the ballot box, it's only at that time that people will really be able to present their political allegiance, one person, one vote. But in the meantime, I think that if governments, Canadian government, the US, the Europeans, if they were to create a conference of some kind and invite the various political leanings, or even just invite technocratic experts in the meantime, then we could really go a long way and bring freedom to our people.
I think that the most important message that you're delivering is that you're all united. And I think that's the takeaway. It's the message that we need to send up the chain so that the government can take concrete measures to support Iran. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Brunel-Giuseppe.
Vandenberg to take the floor. 3 minutes, please.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'd like to start actually with you, Ms. Afshinjam McKay, and build a little bit on what you just said about the unity, because one of the things that we've heard is that unlike previous, even Women, Life, Freedom, in this case, it's everybody out in the streets. It's even though there is so much repression, even though there's so much brutality and atrocities, people are still standing in front of the bullets. And you even mentioned about, the safety of people here looking over your shoulder, but you're still here testifying. And what I'd like to know is, how do we, as parliamentarians, but also as leaders in our communities, how do we amplify your voices? Is there something we can do specifically to make sure that those voices are not silenced, and that all of the people who are standing so bravely are heard despite the regime trying everything to silence them?
Your voices definitely have a huge impact on what happens inside Iran. I know that this regime presents a face like it doesn't care, but I have been in this field for many years, and when I held the position of president and co-founder of Stop Child Executions organization, it was because of members like you that were amplifying the messages of these children that were on death row that got them freed. If there's a medical doctor, for example, who's right now facing the death penalty just because he helped serve some of the victims of this massacre, then your voices, just a simple tweet, makes all the difference. But we're asking for more than just tweets, of course. We want you to make this an issue, your issue. This is not, again, an Iranian issue. This concerns the safety and security of all Canadians and the world entire.
Ms. Atima Daimi, if I could ask you, you spoke about the need for a coalition of countries. I think you talked about perhaps leading G7 countries. Why is it really important that this be done through coalitions, that the world mobilize?
I believe that in any case, it's very important. Sorry, I cannot hear it. I believe that when there is human rights broken. The democratic countries, they have to stand against it, and it's very important. But I believe that if it is a coalition action, anything, I've learned it from prison, and I think anything as a coalition, as a get-together, it is power, together power words is a lot more powerful than individuals. ادامه میدیم رئیس
I'm done? Okay, sorry.
Now I would like to invite Madame Kranes to take the floor for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask this question from Mr. Silver. You've been upfront about the involvement of the IRGC in Canada. All of you have, and the interference, both in our civilian life but also in our political process. And I'm wondering if you might be able to comment on the status of the Foreign Interference Registry and how, where we're at with that, and how it might help.
Appreciate that important question about Iran's transnational repression and foreign interference. While I haven't studied the issue in great enough depth to comment on that particular question, I would want to comment more generally on the need to continue holding Iran accountable for its foreign interference and transnational repression in coordination with our allies as well. I would flag that Canada's current policy when it comes to other countries considering prescription of the IRGC is to quietly lobby against it. While we've designated the IRGC, we're encouraging allies not to do so in order to maintain some sort of link or be able to have some channel there. And I think with some pressure from parliamentarians, that can hopefully change. As the UK is considering it, and as our High Commission in London is lobbying against it, it would be important for parliamentarians to send a message that the IRGC should be banned by our allies, as the EU just did, as the UK should do, and where within the G7, you reference, foreign interference. There was a very important statement that the government coordinated amongst the G7 when we were chair, calling out this foreign interference, and it seems to conflict with that position to then be lobbying against designating the IRGC. So it might be worth engaging our allies abroad to follow suit, and that might be a very effective way to limit our exposure as Canadians to this threat if our allies join in and share intelligence and law enforcement.
Maybe Mr. Sharouz, do you want to add to that, specifically with respect to the interference of the IRGC in Canada and in Canadian politics?
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's really essential that we take this issue seriously. With respect to that registry, I have to, similar to Mr. Silver, say that I haven't studied it closely enough. But foreign interference is a real thing, and it's happening in Canada. Regrettably, the commission that we held, the commission of inquiry that we held, didn't look closely enough at Iran. It looked at other actors, other malevolent actors. But I really do think that it's essential that we take a closer look at Iran's foreign interference here in Canada, their role in transnational repression, their role in affecting our elections, their role in cyber warfare here in Canada. And I think it's really essential to sort of circle back to an earlier point for us to coordinate, because they're not merely targeting Canada. They are trying to sow chaos across the free world. So it's really important that we do this work in coordination with our like-minded countries, with other G7 nations.
Thank you. Monsieur Brunel-Duceppe, à vous la parole.
Mr. Brunel-Duceppe, you have 3 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Silver, is there not a risk that Canada be perceived as a haven for presumed perpetrators of these actions if there's never an investigation? It's quite right. It sends a message to the worst torturers in the Iranian regime that Canada is open. We already see it. 700 members of the IRGC are in Canada. They're sending their money here, taking their vacations here, sending their families here for their education. There's already a message being sent, and when we allow the crimes to continue against the Iranian people and against Canadians, we leave the door open to these people, and it sends the wrong message. On the contrary, if we launch prosecutions and an investigation, it sends the message that those people, those torturers, those murderers are not welcome in our country. And that's an important message. And while the situation is destabilizing in Iran and many people will flee, and Canada may be a premier destination for these people. So it is a very urgent issue, and it is a sensitive one. We must move quickly to send this message to Iranian officials. Go ahead.
Already looked upon as a haven for these regime affiliates. And they bring in billions of dollars of laundered money. I am in touch with a whistleblower that can tell you the names, accounts, how much money was transferred from what bank to what bank, because he used to be a banker himself and knows all the transactions. I have told CSIS, I have told the police, and they do not even pick up the phone to call this man and inquire about the pages and pages of documentation that he has.
On se parlera après le comité.
Let's talk after the committee. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Duceppe.
All our good witnesses, thanks for being with us. Thanks for your good answers. It gives a good illustration, a good lighting to this subcommittee, and I believe every one of us here understand better the situation in Iran with what you have said just in this good meeting. If the will of the committee to adjourn the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.